dad is busy preaching at our home congregation, teaching a class or something like that, so it's always wonderful and particularly nerve-wracking to preach in front of him. Those of us who were in the Bible class this morning got to hear a little bit of the reason why I'm a little nervous to preach in front of him. You know, inspiration comes in some of the weirdest ways. A lot of times when preparing for a Bible class or a lesson or even personal study, inspiration can come in unusual ways. Perhaps to be a person in a Bible class bringing up a point, a teacher saying something, a preacher giving a certain verse that really strikes home. This morning, this inspiration comes from a homemade lasagna that I was eating helping with the Generations program, which is a Christian dance studio that I had the opportunity to help in a performance. I was sitting there, hungry, very hungry, after a long day's work, and this lasagna seemed to hit home. And I had the song, As the Deer Pants for the Water, stuck in my head. I had it stuck in my head all day. And it dawned on me in that moment the idea of spiritual food. It's an odd thing to think about, but as I was doing my research for this morning's lesson, I find that Jesus used the idea of food, hunger, and water consistently through his ministries. It's something that all of us can relate to, judging by the fact that we all need it to survive. And the fact that we all love food. Especially me being a teenage boy, this is a lesson that particularly hits home with me. But this morning, we're going to be looking at the idea of spiritual bread. When considering to prepare a meal, there's 4 things that are needed. 1, the ingredients. What is it made of? 2, how do you prepare the given meal? 3, when it's finished being prepared, what do you do with it? And 4, what is its result? Before we get too far into this, let's talk a little bit about the idea of hunger. When someone is hungry, and I'm not talking about the little bellyache that you get before a good meal. When someone is starved of food, their body shuts down. They begin to collapse. Food is the source of nourishment where energy is found. So when someone is spiritually hungry, they need something to fill them. This is where spiritual bread comes in. But what is it made of? In every dish there are ingredients. Galatians chapter 5, beginning in verse 22, it seems only right to use this passage in a lesson about spiritual food, being this is the fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5, beginning in verse 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the sinful nature with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking, and envying one another. The first thing we must add to our spiritual life, an ingredient, if you will, is these principles of the fundamentals of religion. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These elements of our lives need to be something that consistently drives us. Every time a decision is made in our life, is it loving? Is it in kindness? Is it in gentleness? Is it made in self-control? Elements that we need to be applying daily. Simple idea. But one that's often overlooked is that these things, there we go, these things are key. Because if you're doing something that is in the fruits of the Spirit, then you're moving towards God. But if you're doing something that's not one of the fruits of the Spirit, you're moving away. There is no middle ground. Either you're living your life lovingly, or you're living your life in hate. You're either living your life in self-control, or you're living out of control. Either you're gentle to one another, or you're harsh to one another. What we must understand is that these fundamentals define our characteristics. Our characteristics define who we are and where we're going to be in eternity. The first ingredient is the fruit of the Spirit. The second ingredient is found in an unusual place, Exodus, the 12th chapter. Please turn there with me. Exodus chapter 12. this particular passage, God has chosen Moses to lead his people out of Israel. Pharaoh consistently turns down his request to leave. And God has done several things to the Egyptian people to force Pharaoh's hand. Time and time again, Pharaoh's heart would be hardened, and he would not let the people go. But in this particular moment, the Lord is fed up with Egypt's stubbornness and decides once and for all to let his people go with a plague that would end all other plagues. The death of the firstborn of every family. But in order that the people would be exempt of this particular plague, they had to do several steps. They had to put the blood of a lamb on their doorpost. They had to eat a certain feast in a certain way. But when he's describing what they had to eat, beginning in verse 8, it's very interesting. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or cooked in water, but roasted over the fire, head, legs, and inner parts. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left until morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it. With your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both man and animal. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. In order for them to be excluded from this mass plague, they had to eat the Passover. But notice, God said, do not add anything to it. Do not eat it a different way than what I say. For this is the way you have to do it. God's given us ingredients that we must put into our lives through this word. This cannot change. We cannot add our own ingredients into our Christian walk. We cannot add different attributes that God did not say to have. God's given us all we need to apply to our Christian walk. We as humans cannot add things to make it better. In fact, the only thing that needs to be in our lives are the elements that God has written about in his word. You know, there was an old preacher, Dan Hager, someone who's very really close to me. He was giving an example on what it means to be clear and start anew in your new walk with God. To remove everything out. He's like, he compared baptism to renovating a bathroom. That when you have a bathroom, you have all this old stuff in it. You had an old sink, an old toilet, an old tub, an old shower head. When you become a Christian, all that old stuff has got to leave. And new stuff has got to come. And he went through several examples of how you would do this. The first was wrong. You take all the new stuff and you slide it in next to the old stuff. What's the problem then? You can't use any of it. It's too packed that it becomes ineffective. He also said how he would unplug all the old stuff, install the new stuff, but he would keep the old stuff right by the door. What's the problem then? You can't come in, you can't learn anything. The correct way to do it is to take all the old stuff out of the house, into the garbage, and put the new stuff in. Likewise, if we are going to remove every element of our old life, we have to go through and clear everything. Every influence, every sin, every temptation that we possibly can remove in order for us to be effective in the Lord's work. We need to replace it with things that are loving, with things that are good, with things that are kind, with things that are gentle, etc. The third ingredient in our spiritual food is an ingredient that we can't explain. Most good chefs have a secret ingredient in their best dish that they don't release, otherwise everyone could make it. God has a special ingredient that we cannot replicate. It's a miraculous factor. You look back at all the times that God used food in a miracle, an example, and a parable. There was always something miraculous about it. Back in the Old Testament, when the Israelites called out to God and said, God, where is our food? We should have just stayed in Egypt and died. Because now we're wandering the wilderness and we have nothing to eat. What did God do? He dropped bread from heaven. It's miraculous. When he was preaching in front of a large crowd on 2 different occasions, and the crowd grew restless, began to get tired, hungry, what did God do? Jesus found bread and fish, a few loaves and a few fish. And he multiplied them so that everyone not only ate, but ate to their fill, and they had leftovers. If we give God a little bit, he can do miraculous things. That's the third ingredient. Letting God do his thing. We are not going to be able to replicate the results